Welcome to Books on Air, the podcast that you just can't put down. You're about to get a sneak peek at what goes on behind the scenes with authors. We'll find out their secret recipe for creating a book. We'll tell you where they get their ideas, and you will get the inside story on their next project. Want to know more? Well, we'll tell you where to find them on social media. Are you ready? Okay, let's meet today's author. I have to tell you that the author I'm about to introduce you to is one of the most interesting and fun people I have had the opportunity to talk with. Her name is Tricia Kell, and the title of her book that we'll be talking about today is Chain of Miracles, Journey Through Faith. Tricia, welcome.
Thank you.
You are a delight. The book, is it fair if I say it's an autobiography?
Yes. When I wrote the book, I pretty well walked through my life, so I think that's pretty well all we can call it.
What made you start writing? How did that happen?
I had a lot of tragedy happening in my life with my kids, my husband. There was accidents and bad accidents, and my first husband died in an accident, and I have two my children that were in separate pedestrian car accidents 9 years apart, and they were both left hemiplegic. And there were so many people coming to me and saying, you've got to share the story. But for me, share the story would mean that I would have to stand up in front of a microphone or write. And I honestly can say I would freeze every time I would stand in front of a microphone. And in writing, I don't even think I passed English in high school.
Wow.
So, for years, it just was, it would be nice. It was one of those impossible dreams that you never think you're going to be able to make it.
I love it that Toastmasters played a role in this.
They were one of the links to the chain.
When you started writing your first speech, all of a sudden you realized that this was not going to be 5 minutes because it was 20 pages long. Is that right?
That's right.
And that was the beginning of your first book.
That was the beginning. And a week later, it was 100 pages long. And that's when I said to my husband, I think I'm writing a book. And he was really excited because he wanted to share the story.
Well, you've got such an interesting background. You were involved in the racing scene in Canada. You drove a race car. You have skydived. You have jumped off of water skiing ramps. I mean, when you and I started talking before we started to record, I was really struck by the adventurous nature of the life that you had led up to all this tragedy.
But the one thing that I was trying to beat was a fear by doing all those things. And I was stepping out in fear and trusting God. I do have a lot of faith in my life. But by not being able to, it started out that because of everything that happened in my life, I became afraid to fly. And I had gone on a vacation with my husband down to Vail, Colorado to go skiing, and they had to drug me on the plane because all of a sudden I had this horrid fear of flying. When you write a book and you become an author and you have to travel, North America to do speaking engagements and book signings, you kind of have to fly.
Yes, you're right, you do.
So people were telling me, you're going to have to beat the fear of flying, and you know what you can do? You can go skydiving. Well, why would anybody jump out of a perfectly good airplane? That made no sense to me. But if it was going to beat the fear, then I was going to try it. It didn't. It didn't do anything for me but scare the heck out of me. And I'm glad that I jumped out of the airplane, but I would never, ever do it again.
Wow. What helped you beat this fear?
It kept going on because people were making suggestions to me. This will help you. That'll help you. And I kept trying them. but they never worked. Yes, I did beat my fear of flying, by the way.
What was the thing that helped?
I took flying lessons.
So now you know how the airplane works.
Yeah, now I have more of an understanding. And yet I was raised, my dad was military, and he worked on planes, and so he used to always explain it to me, but I was too young then to really have an understanding. And when I went and took flying lessons, it was, in a way, I think because I'm a Christian, I think I felt like I kicked the enemy's butt.
I really like that.
That was the ultimate for me.
I really like that. There's a quote that you have in the book that I think is so appropriate, especially because of what's going on right now in our world. You say in your book, some days are easy. Some days are tougher. Some days I find totally ridiculous. But then there are the days that I experience the miracles. I love that, Tricia.
Yeah, and I carried that right through to now. And when you talk about, what's happening in the world and the virus and that, and all that I've gone through has brought me to the point where there's no fear here.
Has religion always been an important part of your life?
Not as much as when the accident started happening. It was very different.
Now, both of your children, the accidents that both of your children had, medical professionals told you that they were not going to survive, and yet both of them survived.
They were both in comas. Like I say, there was 9 years apart, and we're at the time of year. One was on Mother's Day, and one was 9 years later, Mother's Day weekend.
No.
Yeah, and they said the doctors, they of course remembered us because my son was in a coma. He was hit first, and he was in a coma for 4 months. And they said, well, he'll, even if he comes out of the coma, he'll never walk or talk again. And, you might get some expression or a bit of emotion. But, and I prayed and I believed, and that's where I started my walk with a personal relationship with God, where I read what I could read and had an understanding and got to the point where when I pray for something, I start from the point of victory. I am, I'm there, it's done, my prayer is answered, and I watch it all unfold. And it's growing experience. You have to stay on top of it, but it's brought me a long way. And my son, he works for Holiday Inn. He is hemiplegic. He's still, he walks, he talks, he's actually engaged to be married. So,
congratulations.
yes. And we had a problem with seizures, of him having seizures after the accident, and they have just realized that it's very simple process that they can do to the frontal lobe, that there's very low risk that they can totally stop the seizures. And he was scheduled to go to Calgary for the final testing just before the COVID-19 started, and so we're just on hold waiting. And my daughter was 9 years later, and she was 11, and she was in a coma when same thing. They said, no, she'll never come out of the coma. She'd been in there for 3 months. Came out of the coma, and she couldn't talk. And they said that she would never be able to talk again. And believe me, some days I would just wish she would just be quiet. She walks. She is actually a power lifter for Special Olympics, but they both were hemiplegic on the right side. But we just walking forward. It was like God provided us with what was needed. I always believed that they were going to have very good quality of life, and it was a long road. But the good keeps coming.
Did you have an audience in mind when you were writing the book, or Was it more to get the story out in a book form?
I didn't plan on writing the book. So what I did was I got up at 4 o'clock every morning because that was a quiet time for me, and I literally walked through my life. When people say to me about the book, you remembered colors that people were wearing, you remember things, I actually walked through once I got started on it. And when the book was finished, then I realized that there were so many different things that happened through my life that 75% of an audience that I'm speaking to can really relate to something that's in there that happened. That's also happened to them. So it's, and the other 25%, I usually receive a lot of emails from people after they read the book. And that 25% is just like, it's almost a looking forward learning experience for them on how to deal with things.
Did you learn anything as you were going through writing this book, as you were walking through your life?
Still am. Absolutely. What I learned was to walk in grace, and that's what I was saying about, the peace, the no fear, the trusting. My self-confidence has grown so much. And I mean, I couldn't stand in front of a microphone and speak, but now I speak before crowds of 7,000, 10,000 people, and I love it. And believe me, when I look back and think of that girl that stood in front of that microphone that was so afraid and was in tears, I never, ever thought that it was possible to do what I'm doing. And it's just the walk. It was the chain that kept running through, that kept me going. And the more, now I'm very, it's more natural now. I live it. I live that there's no fear. There's answers to everything. And now so much I'm finding out about this, with this virus. You look out, it's almost like if you're in a boat. Can I give you an example?
Certainly,
if you're
please.
In a boat and there's water all around you, and the water's coming into the boat because you're focused on the water and you're watching it coming into the boat, and you're thinking, I'm going to sink. But for me, the boat that's my focus. No. What's happening around me, all the circumstances happening around me, doesn't have an effect on me. I keep my focus on God. And that's where I have the peace. That's where I have no fear. And there's always the hope.
I think your message is really an important one to be talking about today. And I know that we've piqued the interest of people who are listening to us. I know that they can find your book on American Amazon. I looked at American Amazon myself this morning, and it's there. There's a little excerpt from the book, and all they have to do is put your name, and it's Tricia, Tricia, Kell, Kell, and the title of the book is Chain of Miracles, Journey Through Faith. And if they put that in the search feature at the top and click on it, the book comes right up and they can purchase it right there. Now, there's also a Canadian Amazon. Is it available on Canadian Amazon?
Yes. And actually, if you type in just Chain of Miracles, then it's available in Barnes & Noble. It's available in most of the bookstores in the States. If they don't have it, they'll bring it in. There's books available for them. And
I think it's also available on Shopify, right?
Shopify, yes.
Now, where can our listeners find you on social media? I know that you're doing some of the social media platforms. Which ones are you doing, and how could the listeners find you?
Best one for me is Facebook.
Okay.
Put their name in, and I'll accept them as a friend.
I love it. Are you on Twitter?
I'm also on the business section of Facebook.
What about Twitter and Instagram? Are you doing both of those?
Just being set up.
Good. So in the future, if they go to Twitter or Instagram, they'll find you there.
Yes. Actually, the truth is, I am on Twitter. I just can't remember what you have to put in. I'll be honest. My husband keeps me going.
It's okay. It's okay. I love it. We're about to run out of time, Tricia, and I always like to give an author sort of the last word about their book. What would you like for a reader after they have picked up a copy of Chain of Miracles and they read it and they close that last page or go to that last page for the last time? What would you like for them to take away from your book?
No matter what they're going through in their life, to never give up. Just never give up. Keep going, and even if you have to step out in fear because the fear won't last. It will run smooth. I think the biggest line is never give up. And God is there. Doesn't take anything to call on him. And that'll be the start of your walk. That's the journey through faith.
Well, you are a delightful, inspirational person to have a conversation with. I can only imagine how powerful it must be to hear you speak. Thank you so much for joining us today on Books on Air.
Thank you, Suzanne. I really enjoyed this.
You can find Tricia Kell's book, Chain of Miracles, Journey Through Faith, on both Amazon and Shopify. You've been listening to the Books on Air podcast, brought to you on webtalkradio.net. And by the way, you can also hear our podcasts on iTunes and iHeartRadio. I'm Suzanne Harris, and I hope you'll join our next Books on Air podcast. Remember, it's really the place to be. Thanks so much for listening.